right now, where we are in technology versus growing up, the resources were not right at my fingertips. The resources are everywhere. Find a community, whether it be on Instagram, TikTok, just find that community and get into that community.
Yes.
And then learn things and meet people. We all have our different stories. We're out here. We are definitely out here.
Mm-hmm.
Find a good podcast, find a good book. It's just all about resources, and they're at your fingertips.
Your dream is to become a mom. My dream is to help you get there. I'm Rebecca Gruenspan, a single mom through domestic adoption and an adoption consultant for over a decade. I'll be your guide, along with other adoption professionals and members of the adoption constellation, walking you step by step down this beautiful and complex path of adopting your baby. When I was going through the adoption process, I had no idea what I was doing, what I needed to know, or more importantly, who to trust. Well, after helping hundreds and hundreds of families grow through the beauty and complexity of adoption, I've learned more than a thing or two, and let me tell you, it's not always rainbows and butterflies. This isn't just another podcast sharing adoption stories, but it's for you if you're genuinely committed to diving in with an open heart, eager to learn everything there is to know about adopting a baby so that you can show up for yourself and your child in the best way possible. This podcast is for you if you're ready to put your newfound knowledge into action. Adoption isn't for the weak of heart, and it certainly isn't done when your baby gets placed in your arms. If that's what you think, I'm afraid you're living in La La Land. My promise to you is to keep it real if you promise to keep digging. We'll acknowledge the hard, and we'll also celebrate the joy that is adoption. You ready? Let's do this. Welcome to the Adoption Roadmap Podcast. Today, we're joined by Tarcia Smith, a certified extreme hip-hop instructor, wellness coach, and host of the Adoption Journey podcast. A Black adoptee raised by a Black family, Tarsha grew up in a predominantly white Florida community, navigating her unique identity with appreciation and curiosity. In a rare twist, Tarsha, on her own accord, asked her mom if she was adopted. This revelation from a closed adoption set her on a path of discovery, leading to a reunion with her birth family and a deep dive into the stigmas of adoption within the Black community. Tarsha uses her podcast platform to shed light on the multifaceted experiences of adoption, from closed adoption to open, domestic to international, transracial to same-race, and so much more. Join us as we explore her own journey of self-discovery, resilience, and the transformative power of embracing one's story. Tarsha, thank you so much for being here. I'm really, really stoked for this conversation, and I just want to jump right in with my first question and have you talk to us about that first time you learned you were adopted, or at least the first time it was brought to your attention. Tell me about that.
First, let me tell you, thank you so much for having me. And that was an awesome intro. I was like, girl, she's talking about me.
Indeed, I am, ma'am.
That was awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So I'll dive right into your question. The first time I discovered that I was adopted, I grew up in a family where looked like anyone. It's some will call like a chocolate complexion. My mother's very fair skinned, as is her side of the family. My dad is closer to my complexion. However, I didn't grow up around my dad's side of the family like that because they lived in another state. I did see them often, but the people that I was around was my mother's side of the family.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, literally in passing one day, I just asked, am I adopted? It just seems like, yes. And
what did you know about adoption? Like,
I don't. Now that piece I can't remember. It had to be something between television, school, I can't quite remember.
Okay.
But I do remember being very proud about that. And my mom and I laugh about this now, my dad too, that I was so excited about being adopted that was one of my show and tells one time in school. Like, I didn't take anything. My show and tell was, I'm adopted. And it got to the point where I would be like, my name is Tarsha and I'm adopted. My mom was like, girl, you don't have to tell everybody. I was excited. I was, I don't know, I grew up, excuse me, with an appreciation for being adopted, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I don't have a horror story when it comes to being adopted and feeling a type of way. That's not my testimony.
Do you know where that appreciation came from?
I don't. I didn't recognize it being an appreciation as a little girl because I'm a kid. Mm-hmm. I grew up, had a great life, very spoiled little girl.
As most of our children who we worked so hard for are.
I was an only child until I was 9. Mm-hmm. So I was their only baby for quite some time. Mm-hmm. I was just living my best life. That's what I was doing. I never felt any type of way. And I began to learn as I began to, grow up what adoption was. Mm-hmm. And then I got to watch them because my sister is also adopted. Okay. So by the time that happened, still a kid, I'm only 9, but I did witness that process. And so I think I just had a good life. And so I was just living my best life.
Were you excited when your parents said that they were going to adopt another child?
Oh, I was 7. I went and played. I was headed to some Barbie dolls or something.
You're like, all right, cool.
Exactly.
Got to go play.
And meanwhile, my mom was like, what just happened?
What do you remember from that? From your sister being... And was it through foster care? Was it domestic, private?
No, both of us were private adoption.
Okay.
I remember them telling me that we were going to. I remember being very excited. And then very shortly after, I remember going to get her. I don't know where we went, but I remember she was about 2 months old. Mm-hmm. I was adopted around 5 weeks old. And just very excited because I had been an only child and had wanted a sibling, like a lot of kids. Sure. I grew up with cousins.
Yep.
And so those are my sister cousins because we're all very, we're stair-stepped in age. And so that's how I grew up.
I love that. Now, your adoption was closed, right?
Yes.
So what were some of your and wait, was your sister's adoption closed?
Yes.
Okay. What were some of your challenges, and how can adoptive families help navigate these same challenges if they also find their child in a closed adoption?
Yeah, so my challenges didn't come until later on when I started wanting to know more. Mm-hmm. My parents did tell me, and they didn't tell me right off the bat because I'm a kid, but as I began to get older, high school age, teenagers, and then they would start to sprinkle me with information. And by the time I graduated from high school, I knew everything that they knew. So I never held anything back. So that's one thing I would tell parents that find themselves in the closed adoption. And I don't know how, if that's a thing, like back then, that's what it was. It was a closed adoption.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think today you lean more towards open adoption or semi-open. But if you find yourself in a closed adoption situation, be honest and tell them early. So I think that's maybe also why my identity was shaped up the way that it was, because I didn't grow up in a house of secrecy. It was known. It wasn't talked about all the time, but, it was known. I would also say any information that you have. I definitely wouldn't just throw it at your 5-year-old.
Right.
But like my parents did, sprinkle them with information as they have questions. And then, navigate your child. And for me, I was very inquisitive, still am. Mm-hmm. And I always have all the questions, and they answered me age appropriately.
Sure. Now, there are some children, I think this is worth mentioning, that won't ask and will continue to wait for a parent to lead the conversation. So I would just say if your child is not asking, it's still up to you to show them that the door is open by bringing it up every once in a while in different age-appropriate ways.
For sure. I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Now, go ahead. What were you?
I was just going to say, I forget about that side of the coin because, again, I'm going to ask all the questions.
I'm like you, which is why we're both podcast hosts today. Did you ever ask your parents when or if they had planned to tell you if you hadn't asked?
My mom said that she had always planned to tell right around the time that I asked, because it was the adoption agency told them that the rule of thumb was by age 5. Now, she had gone a little past that, but it was definitely their plans to tell me. I just beat her to the punch.
That's so interesting. Now, I mean, this was a while ago, and most adoptions are open now. But one of what I tell our families is from day one, and listen, a lot has changed. I'm not saying one way or another about your family, but it's interesting to hear that. I mean, at least they were saying, tell your child. And today I say, from day one, start that conversation so that when they start to understand things, they just have always known. So, that's interesting. So, be open, tell the child their story, let them know everything about their story in age appropriate, developmental, the right times.
For sure.
Okay. As it pertains to adoption, what do you wish your parents had done differently, if anything, and what do you feel like they did really well?
I feel like they told the truth really well. I feel like they were open really well. There was a small window where I wanted to start looking, and at first, I don't want to say there was pushback or hesitance, but I also understand too now in hindsight, at that time, I personally was going through a lot, which had nothing to do with my adoption. It was just other stuff. But then coupled with that, I was like, now I want to go find my family. And it wasn't the right, and it didn't happen at that time either because it wasn't the right time. So they gave me pushback at that time. I interpreted it as they didn't want me to do it.
Were you a teenager?
But again, say again.
Were you a teenager at that time?
I was about 18, 19.
Okay.
I knew it all.
Yeah. Sounds about right.
Everything. What are you talking about? I got this. And so at that time, they were being protective.
Yeah.
Because when I did actually do it later on in life, they were 100% supportive. But by then, I was in my 30s.
Oh, wow. A lot of time had passed. Okay, so when was the first time that you remember starting to be curious about where you came from, who your biological family was, and what did that look like?
I want to say I was somewhere right around 5th, 6th grade, somewhere in there. I very vividly remember, again, just one random morning at breakfast, asking my dad, do you know anything about my birth mom? And he told me, I always knew I was born in Chicago. And he told me, you were born at Cook County Hospital, and she was 15 years old. And that came from my dad. And I wish I could remember how old I was, but can see the scenario in my head. And that was the first time I learned that part. Because I think that was, if I knew it prior, I don't remember. That's the first time I vividly remember hearing somebody tell me that. So then I began to just imagine, oh, she was 15. Still really not understanding she was a kid herself. I didn't get that revelation till later.
Okay.
But just...
because she probably knew it all too.
Oh,
she was 15.
15. We know everything. I wanted to, I just started to, I think like most adoptees do, just dream and imagine and fantasize what it was, what she looked like, who she was, what she might have been doing, just all that. That's about the time I remember those like I like to coin rainbows, unicorns, and ponies types of things started happening in my head surrounded my birth mom.
Did you ever fantasize that you would have had a better life with her?
No.
Okay.
No, because I was too busy living my best life. I think people don't get that. I didn't want to be anywhere else. I had no desire to be anywhere else. I had a good life. I just knew I came from somewhere else. I knew I had little quirks that were different than the rest of my family. I could see that, especially as I began to grow up. And for me, it was like, where do I get this from? Why do I do this?
Mm.
Why do I act like this? Those are the questions I had. It had nothing to do with me wanting to be anyplace else.
Okay, so that's what was starting to ring stronger in your head.
I just knew looks, and then the way I moved. I just didn't quite do things the same way as my cousins and my own parents.
Yeah.
So, but I didn't want to be anyplace else.
That
was good.
I love that. Every single person's story is so unique to them.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm sure you know that more than anything. And we'll talk a little bit more about your podcast later, but you interview so many people. And I'm sure there are people just like you who are like, oh no, I thought I'd have a great life with her. I was not, I wondered why.
Right. Yeah, I hear it. Yeah, you are absolutely right. Some people go, oh my gosh. Or I've even had people tell me, even if my life was worse, I still would have rather been with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. So I love that we're talking, because we often hear from Black adoptees who were adopted by white families. We rarely hear from Black adoptees adopted by Black families. And in one of the first thing you said is the reason why you asked your mom is because you had lighter skin than your family. Oh, you have darker skin.
Yeah.
Your skin didn't match, and that's what prompted you, right? Is there anything nuanced about Black adoptees being raised and adopted by Black families, first of all? And then can you share what it was like growing up in a Black family, but within a mostly white community? How did all of this kind of shape your identity? I mean, it all did, obviously.
I don't know if there's anything nuanced about it, because being adopted, you are at the core of it. You're just not with your biological family anymore. If you rip all the layers of the onion back, at the core root of it, all of us are placed with another family. So me being placed in a Black family, I don't know. I will say I can only speak from my personal experience.
Yeah.
While my skin was a different shade, I think it didn't rattle me to the point where it's like, who are these people? I need to be someplace else. It didn't rattle me like that. I wasn't sad about it. I just knew my skin and my features didn't look like anybody else. Being raised in a predominantly white community, I don't think that's, there are a lot of Black people that have that experience, even not being adopted.
Yeah.
So I think that speaks more to, for me, it helped me learn how to navigate both worlds. And what I mean by that is, as a Black person, we got to know how to navigate when you're in an all-white room and when you're in an all-Black room. And when that's our truth. And you might hear the term a lot, code switching. It's a thing.
Yeah.
And I think I grew up doing it, not even realizing I was doing it. Got really good at doing it. Still am really good at doing it. But it's nothing you think about. You just know where you are and how to move. And then that's what you do. So I think that's what shaped me. I do remember, it was like Monday through Friday was my quote unquote white experience. And on the weekends was my Black experience. And what I mean by that is because that's when I was at church, or that's when I was with my cousins, and they lived in Orlando at the time. I was in Tampa. And when I would get around on the weekends, I remember hearing, "Why do you talk like a white girl?" And my mother would always tell me, "That's not a thing. You speak proper English." So I remember hearing that. But I wouldn't wrap that up in my adoption. I would just wrap that up. That's just that's where we lived at the time. And it could be for anybody, adopted or not.
It's interesting as I hear you talk. I think there's a couple, I use the word nuance, right? There's a couple things that come to mind. One is that a lot of white people who adopt white babies think if they adopt a white baby, their family won't be conspicuous and their child won't have as many issues with their identity. And maybe Black families feel the same way, that, if you adopt within your race, it will be a lot easier. And I think, especially in the Black community, maybe that's part of it, right? Everything in adoption is both and, right? On the one hand, yes, you are Black, and so you know what it is to be part of the Black community because that's who you are. That's how you were raised. You don't have to learn about Black history and about your culture and ethnicity because you're ingrained in that. Right. And at the same time, you look different than everyone else still, right? And there's never a situation, I don't think, in adoption where an adoptee is going to never experience the questions around identity. Whether you look like your family or you don't look like your family, if you know you're adopted, you're probably going to have some questions and grapple with some things about who you are or how I get like this or health or any of that. Would you agree?
I didn't start asking the health questions until I had my son.
Yeah, that I understand, but I was just using that as a...
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Yeah, I hear you. I understand.
Yeah. Whereas a Black person adopted in a white family, like a lot of them don't know what it means to...
There's a lot that they don't know, and I've learned that a lot more here within the past year and a half, speaking to a lot of them. As you said, they're not ingrained in their culture. Some of them. So I almost want to say most of them.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things that stands out to me for interracial adoptees is not learning the appreciation for their hair.
Yeah.
That is something that is huge. And in the white community, it's not, for the most part, when you have a Black baby, it's not considered. There are people that go out and get the education on how do I deal with my child's hair. But that thing that's kind of ingrained in you, I think more so being around Black people about loving your hair, that's missed. And it's not in just girls, it's in boys too. And so there's a lot that goes to that, you know, being the transracial adoptee as a Black person with a white family versus being a Black person with a Black family. There's things that are missed. Absolutely.
And I'm going to link in the show notes. We did a whole episode about Black hair care with Tamika Swint from Styles for Kids. Do you know Tamika?
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. And so we did a whole episode on Black hair care. So if you haven't listened to that yet, I will link that and you can go back and listen to that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's huge. So I think that there are nuances, but you don't even think about them because that wasn't your experience.
It's my experience.
Right.
So that's fair. That's definitely a fair statement.
How did the Black community around you view adoption? Did they know you were adopted? And did you feel supported or faced with any stigmas?
They didn't know. It wasn't talked about.
Okay.
I have some very, very close friends that I grew up with. They knew. But it was just like, oh. And then that was it. I remember here and there growing up, people asking me why I didn't look like my mom. And I would just be like, oh, I'm adopted. And there was never a lot of conversation. Now, in the Black community, we, especially the generation before me, we keep the family business in the house, and we're not telling, and the secrets are the secrets, and everybody doesn't need to know. And so, and I would go as far as even to say, in some cases, adoption might have even been linked to embarrassment. But I will flip the coin and also say this. Stacey Gatlin from Yes We Adopt, she was just talking about this. We've been adopting since
generations.
Because it's what we had to do, whether it, and so we've been taking care of each other. So adoption is not anything that's new to, what we've been doing as a people, because we've been doing it, taking care of each other's family, kinship adoptions, whether it was on paper or not.
Right.
And so, Black people, yes, like Stacey Gatlin says, yes, we adopt. We do. And I don't know that it's I think that if you talk about a stigma, I think the stigma would be Black people don't adopt. And I don't know that that's true. Because we definitely do. We definitely do.
You just said something, and now I forget what you said, that you were met with, people asked you why you didn't look like your family. You said you were adopted, and some people reacted to that. What did you say?
They'd just be like, oh, okay. And then that was pretty much it. There was never a real, especially growing up, there was never a real conversation. I think as I got a little older, people would kind of ask, do you ever, if we're talking about it, this was just amongst me and my close friends, this wasn't just random people, do you ever want to find your parents?
Did they say real or did they say real?
That's what they said. You're right. That would be the word, your real parents. Yeah.
How did you react to that?
And I would just be like, one day, and I know where you're going with that. As a kid, that real.
It didn't. Okay, it went right over your head. Okay.
Yeah, I hear you. But as a kid, I was like, yeah, one day.
What about when you got older? When you heard that? Did that
as an adult?
Okay.
I don't think I've ever heard that.
Mm-hmm. Now, something I've heard, and I don't know what you're saying about the Black community adopting, is that when it comes to more formalized adoption, that there's a pushback. And I can't remember if it's the cost or if it's the cost.
It's the cost.
Because there is a huge need for more Black couples to adopt babies.
One of the big pushbacks is the cost. It's the cost. A lot of people, I've talked to a few people, and I have one mother in particular that comes to mind. She did both. She did the the private adoption, and then she also fostered to adopt.
Mm-hmm.
And when she fostered to adopt, that story is, one of those things where she didn't foster to adopt because she didn't know it was going to lead to that. Mm-hmm. That's where it led. But it's the cost. I think that's one of the biggest things. If there's anything within the Black community, it's the cost. But is that just in the Black community? Is that not all the way across the board?
Yeah, it is. It is. There's such a need because more birth moms are have specific requests when it comes to who they want adopting their baby. And more we're finding that Black birth moms or birth moms who are having biracial babies want somebody in the immediate family to look like them. And you could ask any agency in the country, it is so difficult to find. I guess I would say that. And when we do have a Black couple, which is different, we get a lot of Black single women, which sometimes they want, sometimes they don't for whatever reason. But when we have Black couples or biracial couples, they adopt pretty quickly.
Yeah. I can see that. I also can see that you have a lot of single Black women.
Yeah.
Because there's something going on with marriage, and that's a whole other conversation.
Oh, boy.
Where people are just like, you know what? I'm not going to wait anymore. I'm going to go do this by myself. But we're not even going to.
I'm in that pool. I adopted by myself. Yeah.
So, yeah, I could see that.
Mm-hmm. I also think that there's a thing in general with men, with ego and machismo about having it be your own biology. And maybe that's a cultural thing also. I don't, and again, I'm going to bring up Stacey Gatlow once again, because when she and I talk, because she's an adoptive. Yeah, I know who she's. I asked her that very same thing. Ooh. And if I'm remembering correct, she didn't have, her husband was on board. But you do hear about that. I'm running through my mental Rolodex of adoptive parents I've talked to about that. I've heard some guys just need a minute. Give me a minute. Let me wrap a lot around it. Yeah. And then they're okay. So yeah, I think males process it a little differently because of what you just said. There's something about the lineage and the
the real blood lineage. And so they just process it differently. But I think overall, if that's where we're headed and that's what we're doing, and for the most part, they're okay. It just takes them a little bit. They navigate there differently.
I guess the other thing that I would bring up is you had mentioned before, that the secrets stay within the house. You don't need to air your dirty laundry. You don't need to tell everybody your personal business. And I'm wondering, first of all, just going back to your mom saying, you don't need to tell everybody you're adopted, if that was part of it, or I don't know. Sure. Yeah. So, part of adoption, you are airing out everything from your finances to your background, how you were raised, who's in your family.
As a kid, hey, I'm adopted.
No, I mean, yes, and I love that. I think that's so beautiful that, and hopefully when your mom said, you don't need to tell everybody, you didn't say, oh, is this a bad thing? Hopefully that didn't resonate with you, but
never really stopped.
Yeah, good. No, but as far as going back to, trying to kind of dissect the Black community adopting, could that be a piece of it as well as opening up all of the family, everything?
You're doing just that.
Right.
You are absolutely correct. And I just keep going back to, as a kid, because this is when I was running around doing all this, I'm just speaking to my personal experience. I don't know that you had infertility problems.
Right.
I don't know that you were able to afford to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know all the things that led up to this. So I'm not understanding that by me saying this. It's saying a lot without saying a lot. But you are absolutely right. I was saying a lot without saying a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a thing in the Hispanic community as well. A lot of Hispanic birth moms that I have seen, and I'm making a generalization based on only facts that I have seen. I'll just put that out there. It's not data driven, but I've seen that in the Hispanic community, moms are very private and often won't go to the doctor, often won't, they don't tell their family members, because they are very private and don't want people in their business. And I think that in some ways that's a cultural thing. White people will talk about anything. No, obviously I'm being very generalized.
For Black people, and I'm the Spanish people too, yeah. We're not. I agree.
Is there anything you think we can do better to reach more Black couples to adopt?
To get more couples to adopt, I think the only thing that I won't say the only thing, just getting the information out there about what this really, really is, because something else that may be a roadblock is we have our own things made up in our head about what adoption is or isn't. So getting more resources out there, these podcasts.
Yeah.
Hearing real live stories, real people tell their stories is a great way. The books, at this point in the game, social media, I think just being able for people to hear real life stories from adoptive parents and the adoptee on both sides.
Yeah.
To help people really understand and then to make an informative decision.
I have noticed in general, so funny, here we are, we're talking about race, and I know I'm asking you as a Black person to talk about the Black community. I realize that I am doing that as a white person. I will just acknowledge that. And I think I often say, gosh, if anyone just listens into my conversations on a daily basis about, oh, this is a Black baby. Oh, this is a biracial baby. Oh, are they Black? Are they white? I talk about race all day long because it is so prevalent in the world of adoption. you cannot get around it. You have to talk about race constantly. And so I hope you don't feel any certain way. I did ask you ahead of time, is anything off limits? Okay, good. But I think some of these things are really important to talk about. And what I have noticed, because of the power of social media, which is both your friend and your enemy in any given second of any given day, there are more groups from the Black community talking about infertility, talking about adoption.
Yes.
And I applaud it so much.
Yeah, because it's something that has not been talked about publicly.
Yeah.
Until recently.
Yeah.
But it's been a struggle for years.
For sure.
And, some of the treatment that we get behind that as Black people and what goes on in the doctor's offices and doctor-patient things, it's been a thing. So I'm glad people are now talking about it.
Yeah. Before we go on, we're going to take a quick break, but don't go away. We still have so much to talk about. Hey there, Adoption Roadmap fam. Are you ready to take the next step on your journey to parenthood? If so, head over to our website and take our quiz. It's called, Are You Ready to Adopt? It's not just about testing your knowledge. It's about making sure you're emotionally and practically prepared for the beautiful, complex journey of adoption. Let's make your dream of parenthood a reality. Go to rgadoptionconsulting.com and take the Are You Ready to Adopt quiz today. That's rgadoptionconsulting.com. The quiz is free, and it will let you know where you are in the process and if you're ready to jump into your adoption journey. Before we get into your podcast, I just want to ask you one more thing about your own story, which is a huge part of your story, which is the reunion with your birth family. Why was your search and reunion so important to you? Especially because you grew up appreciating being adopted, and you alluded to this a little bit. And how has the reunion impacted your identity and your relationships with maybe your both your families?
Yeah. So I will start by saying I found my birth mother in 2012, and I was able to do that because I was able to get a copy of my original birth certificate. And my very first contact was actually a brother that I have that's 2 years older than me. And I knew he existed. He was a part of my non-identifying information. So that's something I grew up knowing as they started sprinkling me with information, that I had a brother that was 2 years older than me. I will say that I remember imagining concerning him, because I knew that we were from Chicago. And I know, Chicago can be rough depending on where you are in Chicago. And so I remember wondering, how was he, if he was okay, if he was dead, or if he was in jail, or if he was, got caught up in that gang life, or all those things. I did wonder about him. So lo and behold, he's the first person that I contacted.
Now, was this after you had your own children?
Yes.
Okay. And that's what kind of prompted you to want to know more, right? Yeah, I think you had mentioned.
That prompted me wanting to know more because of health reasons. Because I'm like, I should probably know my medical history, because now I've got kids. And so that prompted that thinking. I always knew I had people out there. And so I just wanted to know where I come from.
Yeah.
Where I get this face from.
It's a beautiful one if you're watching on YouTube.
And so I, very long story short, I met my brother, and I did go to Chicago about a month after we met online. And I met my brothers and my grandmother cousins and aunties. And I didn't meet my birth mother until the following year, 2013, because she lives in Alabama. However, we did talk. The first time we spoke on the phone was weird. I was just like, I just talked to the person that gave birth to me. Oh my gosh, that was super weird.
Yeah.
In 2013, my husband and I drove to Alabama to finally go meet her. And when I met her, remember what I said earlier, I had all these fantasies, rainbows, unicorns, and ponies about this woman. And when I met this woman, I was very underwhelmed. I was just like, oh.
Tell me more.
One of the biggest disappointments was I didn't look like her.
Okay.
And now I do look like my brother. I've got some of her, like I favor, but I'm looking for my face.
Yeah.
I didn't see that in her. And then just learning, before I met her, I did learn more and more about the family and more about her, and more appreciative that I was where I was. Because, baby, yeah, I was on the whole other side of the tracks, if you will.
Yeah.
But my brother, my older brother, totally fine. Did not get caught up in any of that. None of it. Beautiful family, beautiful wife, beautiful kids, like doing very, very well for himself. He beat all the odds.
Tell me about that reunion.
I'm sorry?
Tell me about that reunion when you first, saw him or...
It was kind of like just looking at a person that I'm related to outside of my kids for the first time. It was surreal. He picked me up from the airport, and he and his wife and myself, we went to breakfast and just kind of started that small talk, trying to get to know each other. But for me, I can't believe I'm looking at a person from my family for the first time.
Did your cheeks hurt after that breakfast from smiling so much?
Yes. And I got to meet my nephews, and later I was there for 2 days. That next day, like when I met my grandmother and like the rest of the family that was in that area, being in a room where I could see my features, that was like overwhelming. Because when you grow up in that family, you don't look like anybody, and that's just your norm. So being in a room and I can see my features, it was just like, this is mind blowing. And then, like I said, the next year I met my birth mom, and okay. The relationships, I have a better relationship with my brothers because I found out I had a younger brother. I didn't know he existed. With my brothers, my birth mother, we talk every now and again, but there's no real relationship, and I'm okay with that because, as I tell everybody, when you go into this search and reunion thing, be okay with where the chips fall.
Were you? Do you think you were?
Yeah. I had to understand how this family functions, and they don't function like what I come from. I come from an extremely tight-knit family on both sides, my mother and father. They don't function like that. Mm-hmm. And so when I understood, oh, y'all don't do family like I do family. So you're not treating me any kind of way. You're treating me just how you treat family. This is just what you do.
Wow.
And I had to be okay with that. Now, I'm not saying I went into that day one.
Right.
This came, over some time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, this is just what y'all do. Okay, let me fall in line because this is what you do.
Yeah.
Got it. So I had to stop taking things personal, because at first I was. And then I understood. But like I said, this was 2012, 2013. This is 2024 now. Real clear.
Interesting. Did you see some of your mannerisms or some of your interests the same as anybody you've met?
No, that didn't happen until I met the other side.
Okay, talk to me.
So fast forward 2023. It was a while before I went to look for my birth father.
Wait, let me back up for a second. Did your birth mom give you any clarity or give you any information?
Yeah. Let's talk about that. She told me, I'm going to say the name because the name was incorrect. The name that she gave me was a man named Carl Jones.
Okay.
She also told me and my older brother that we had the same father. And she told us that she couldn't remember a lot about him, but they didn't have any contact, and she didn't know where he was, and she hadn't talked to him in years. So I held on to this name, and I'm looking for this name. That's a very common name.
Yeah.
So I told myself, when you find your birth father, you're going to have to take a DNA test. But that didn't happen for quite some time between just the whole thing of finding a part of your family. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So I was mentally not prepared to go and do that again. I'm still raising my own family, because at the time my older children were high school, middle school, and then I had a little toddler at the time. And so, I'm still doing life, still just living my best life. And so I was in no rush. And in 2023, I heard God say, it's time to tell your story.
Mm-hmm.
What? How? Why? And so do it in the form of a podcast. Now, I'll back up and say that my husband used to do a little radio show.
Okay.
Years and years ago. He was talking about getting back to it, but because technology has changed, he was like, maybe I'll do a podcast. So in 2021, 2022, he bought podcast equipment, and it's set upstairs in a box, unopened. So when the time came and it was time for me to do what I was supposed to do, the stuff was here. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess I have no excuse but to be obedient. And I set the equipment up and sat in front of the microphone and talked. And I will say this too. I know I'm deviating a little bit from that reunion story.
No, that's okay.
This is not comfortable for me.
Mm-hmm.
This is not, I grew up dancing. Y'all need me to dance in front of this stadium full of people? I got you. Do not give me a microphone though. I don't want a microphone. I don't want to talk. This isn't comfortable for me. But he said, do it. And I said, oh, okay. I'm going to do this. I'm going to turn on. I'm going to tell this story. So I started the podcast to tell my story. I did not know other people wanted to tell their story too. Mm-hmm. I was just putting one foot in front of the other.
People want to feel seen and people want to feel heard.
And all these people started to come and say, oh, I didn't know you were adopted. Oh, I did, because I didn't talk about it like that. I mean, my inner circle knew, but oh, I'm adopted too. Oh, I adopted too. And that just started happening. So in that happening is how I crossed paths with Jay Russell he's going to kill me, Ross and White, from thebirthparentfinder.com.
Okay, yeah.
We crossed paths. And he invited me, we started following each other on social media. Eventually, he invited me on his show. And in our conversation, he offered to, because he knew I had found my birth mom, he offered to help me find my birth dad.
Oh, wow.
And he was like, have you ever thought about taking a DNA test? I was like, yeah, but I haven't done it yet. He was like, well, what are you waiting for? So now we're in 2023, and I was like, you know what? It's time. I'm going to go ahead and do it. You're right, because I'm out here now. So I took the test. I feel like I'm talking so much, so please stop.
No. This is good.
Okay. So I took the test, and I took the test in September 2023. Get the results back in October. I used Ancestry. And I started digging. Now, I've always been one that has loved to do family trees because I put together my parents' family trees. I love history. It's a puzzle to me, sitting down and coming through the census and all that. So I've always had a love for that. So now I'm doing my own. And the closest matches I had were what I now know is a half first cousin and an aunt. But these two people were not related to each other.
Okay.
So that's when I had to pull Jay and Misty, who his DNA person is. And I'm like, okay, I've gone as far as I can go with combing through this. Help me here. They're the ones that broke the code. And at first, they found my grandparents.
Okay, on the other side.
And then we figured out who my father was. Also still in Chicago. And I did have the opportunity to go and meet that side of the family in November of 2023. That's when I found my face.
Wow. And that was less than a year ago. Right now we're in August of 2024.
That's when I found my love for music. Oh. That's when I found my love for dancing. That's when I found all of that. I have 4 sisters and 1 brother on that side. One sister who unfortunately passed away in 2015. She got very sick. It was sudden, unexpected. So I have 3 sisters and 1 brother on that side. So that happened in November, and I went right back in December and spent Christmas with now both sides, because I spent some time with my brother and my mother's side of the family, and then I spent some time with them. I thought being in the room with my birth mother's side of the family was a lot. This was a lot.
Tell me more about that. In what way?
It was a lot because seeing somebody you favor versus your face. This is how much I look like some of my sisters. I sent pictures to my kids, and they were like, at first glance, I thought that was you in that picture. That's how much we look alike.
Wow.
When I got to Chicago and I started meeting other members, people would just look at me and like, oh, I don't even need a DNA test. I know you belong here. Like, just look at your face. Wow. That it was weird. And then having this bond with my siblings on both sides, it just kind of happened. And of course, you have to foster these relationships. But
you just fell into place.
Yeah.
And it was not Carl Jones.
Girl, it was so not Carl Jones. That is not my birth father's name at all. And I did call my birth mother when I found them and solidified everything was correct. And my my younger sister, my baby sister, she also in turn took a DNA test.
Okay.
And that really solidified everything.
Was your mom surprised when she found out it wasn't Carl Jones? Okay.
My brother on my mother's side also took a DNA test because we were told we had the same father.
Oh,
so he's like,
so opened up a lot of can of worms.
Yeah, that's when we found out for sure. We are half siblings. These are not his people. So I did call my birth mom and I told her his name and that I have found him. And she was like, oh, and how much I look like them. And she was like, oh, yeah, you do look a lot like them. Girl, what? The only thing I can say concerning that is that she was young. She went through a lot in her life. God bless her. I won't say she was lying. Only thing I can say is maybe you didn't remember. I don't know. Now, when I met my birth father, he was sick. He was in the nursing home. He had suffered a stroke about 8 years prior. So again, he also was not able to tell me a whole lot because of his mental capacity.
Mm-hmm.
However, he understood who I was. I was able to tell him who his father was because he never knew.
Wow.
That came out in the DNA test.
Yeah.
It was always known. He was the oldest of 8 children. It was speculated who his father was, which the speculation was wrong. But everybody else knew. No one ever really knew who his father was because his mother died young. Their mother died young. So in March of 2024, I lost him. And I did get to see him on 3 occasions, 2 occasions in person. And 2 weeks before he died, my sister FaceTimed me when she was at the nursing home. That would be our last interaction.
What a blessing that you got to meet him when you did.
Yeah. And I remembered that kind of grief hit different. But I remembered when it happened, something came back to me when I was a little girl. I would pray that when I meet and this is a little girl, my real mommy and daddy, please let them both be alive. He gave me that.
Mm-hmm.
He gave me that. And so,
what did that grief feel like?
It felt like, when my sister called me that morning, I was like, I'm sorry, what? What happened? I was in disbelief. And it felt like I was given something and then lost something. But I also knew my siblings were grieving very differently. I was mindful of their grief because it hit them hard because I was her daddy. And so I was just like, I'll be there as soon as I can because I live in Florida, so I had to now go back to Chicago and be there for that. And it was just I still don't have the words for that kind of grief. And it's still kind of, anybody that has gone through grief, it just pops up. And I just thank God for the conversations that I had and the just being able to understand more about myself. The fact that he got to see me, he understood who I was. We got to have some laughs. I'm like, oh, this is where I get my sense of humor from. Got it. So I'm grateful for what I was able to have.
Go ahead. It just never what?
It never occurred to me, and I don't think anybody, that I was about to lose him.
Did you feel conflicted at all with your grief when you lost him and when you were with your sisters?
What do you mean by conflicted?
I don't know. Like, did you feel like because you had just met him, that they were grieving more than you, or that you didn't want to show them how much you were grieving? I don't know what that.
No.
I can't imagine.
We
Okay.
talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
We actually had a conversation about it, and I told them I understood their grief was different than mine.
Mm.
And they told me they understood that I just got here, and then to have to do this, they understood. So we actually talked about it. I didn't hide the tears. I didn't hide the breakdowns. They didn't hide the breakdowns.
Yeah. So it was just different.
Because we actually had a conversation about it.
I love that you had a conversation about it.
Yeah.
I mean, that speaks to how open you are.
I understand. Like, this is different. This was they call him daddy. This was your daddy.
Yeah.
I just got here. But I'm hurting because I just got here.
Yeah.
And
that door was open so briefly, and you felt such a connection in a way that you hadn't with your birth mom.
Right. Yes. And that's the part that I think hit me I'm glad that you brought that up. That's the part that I think hit me the hardest, because I feel like had I had more time, the connection with him would have been very different than what it has been with my birth mom.
Yeah.
Because it was already different in that little bit of time, even with him having a stroke.
Thank you so much for sharing that whole journey with us. So now you're doing this podcast, which you started just solely to share your own story, and finding that people want to be heard and people want to share their stories too. What have you learned from your guests, and what have you learned from your own experience hosting the Adoption Journey podcast, which, by the way, we will link to and people should go listen to?
Thank you. I learned that I too have adoption trauma. If you listen to my early episodes, I would say that I didn't, because I would link the word trauma to, when you hear the word trauma, you think,
it's one of those buzzwords. Yeah, there's some buzzwords in adoption, and trauma is definitely one of them. Right. And I'm glad you're bringing this up, because earlier, as we were talking at the beginning of this episode, I wouldn't think that you would say you have trauma. And I guess that's what I was saying earlier, when no matter whether you look like your family or not, adoptees usually experience some sort of trauma or identity issues or, go ahead.
This is what it is for me.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't know what it is, number one,
mm-hmm.
and you don't know to ask the questions,
mm-hmm.
and it's never talked about, how do you know you have it?
Mm.
And so
good.
Early on, because all those things were true for me, I would say no. As a matter of fact, I even said, now my birth mother, she's definitely got some trauma. And that still holds true.
Mm-hmm.
However, now that I understand more about what adoption trauma is and what that looks like, I can think about things in my own self. I'm like, oh, I've experienced that. And that's what that was.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, the clinginess, the abandonment issues, if you will, like breakups.
How did that play out for you? Clinginess and abandonment. Like, what did that look like for you?
I was like always needing to I'm always going to have a boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always going to have a boyfriend. And when I have a boyfriend, I love hard. Always been like that. And leaving, breaking up, whether it's friendships or boyfriends, I don't do well with that. It hurts a lot. And I just thought, and those are two very extreme things that I've dealt with. And I just thought, oh, this is just who you are. This is just what this is. I didn't know to link it back to my adoption because I didn't understand, because it was never talked. None of this kind of stuff was ever talked about in my house. And I think that's just the lack of what my parents knew, because what you got to understand, this is a whole nother generation. I'm 49 years old, so this is 49 years ago. And they just did things very differently concerning adoption back then.
Mm-hmm.
And so talking to people, understanding, and then taking the time to do my own research and my own reading, I was like, oh. So that's what I have learned from one of the big things I've learned from doing this podcast and speaking to people. Yeah, I have it too. I think it just shows up differently in people. Some people have it,
Absolutely.
And it plays out like really differently, and it's almost like tragic for them.
For sure.
And then there's other people like myself, maybe you can call me, I'm functioning better in it. But I'm also older, wiser. I just look at life differently, handle life differently. And I think that's also why the first time I tried to find anybody when I was 19, 20, it didn't happen. It wasn't time.
Yeah, and I think all of this speaks to the family that you grew up in, the values that they instilled, the support and love that they gave you. Family was really important to you, and I think all of that plays to, you didn't have this tragic story like some people do. And maybe it has to do with their family life growing up. Maybe it doesn't. A lot of time it does. Everybody's different. Everybody has their own story.
Their own story. And I say that all the time. Everybody's story is different, and it doesn't take away from anybody's story. My story doesn't take away from your story. But everybody's story is different and valid. If that's your story, that's your story.
Yeah, for sure. How has your experience influenced your professional approach as a wellness coach? And podcast host, that's a little more obvious, but as a wellness coach,
I'm more mindful about how I view things and how I research about things and how I speak on things. I'm more mindful about how I listen differently.
I was going to say.
I speak a lot differently. I'm careful. Not to say that I wasn't before, but it's definitely changed. And so maybe one of the biggest things is that I listen very differently. I've always been a good listener, but now I listen differently.
Well, I think even what you said before about when you started your podcast, you hadn't even considered, right, that you yourself maybe had experienced what people were calling trauma.
Of course not. Not rainbows, unicorns, and
not rainbows, unicorns, right? And so I can imagine how it has you listening different. Like, oh, well, if this happened to me and I didn't even realize it, let me listen to their story.
For sure. So that's
go
ahead.
You said in an interview once that your philosophy is obedience is better than sacrifice.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
That means that I'd rather be obedient and go through what I'm supposed to go through and do what I'm supposed to do and be uncomfortable because I'm safe in His will, rather than being outside of his will where it's not safe. And I'm just out here doing whatever I want to do. And I don't want the consequence of not doing what I'm being outside of his will. But that has also come with maturity and age and just the willfulness to want to do what I'm supposed to be doing, to be purposeful, to walk in my purpose. And so if that means I got to be out here and be uncomfortable, at least I'm in my purpose.
Where did that come from, and where did this word supposed to? Tell me more about that word.
What I'm supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has a purpose. We're all put here for a purpose. And this is my belief. I'm speaking from my experience.
Yeah.
From my belief. We all have a purpose. And there are things that I know that I was put here on this earth to do. Especially now, knowing my entire story, knowing what I was born into, knowing on both sides, knowing what I could have been brought up in versus what I was brought up in. I don't think any of that was by mistake. I think it was all by design. I went back when I was supposed to go back.
Mm.
And it all lines up to what I'm supposed to be doing here while I'm on this earth. I'm all about the dash, and the dash is between that birthday and that.
I love the dash.
I'm all about the dash. I'm all about just life in the dash.
Ah, so good. I love that you brought that up. Yeah. If people don't know what Tarsha's talking about, I'll link that poem. There's a poem called The Dash, and the dash is between birth and death.
That's where I am in life. And this journey has done nothing but like catapulted me there even more in a way. You could not have told me when I celebrated the year of the podcast back in May of 2024. When I started the podcast in May of 2023, you could not have paid me $1 million to get me to believe that on the very anniversary of the podcast, a year later, I would be in the city where I met everybody, doing a live podcast for the very first time, talking about the family that I had not met yet to a room full of people that I had not met yet.
I wanted to go to that. That sounded like a great event. That's amazing.
Walking your purpose.
Right. So it's this feeling, number one, of what you're supposed to do. You're obviously a woman of God, a faithful woman. Absolutely. Who believes you are getting spiritual guidance. And whether that's through signs or what you hear when you pray or whatever, and that's to you what you're supposed to be doing. Is being intentional in your life.
So intentional.
That's beautiful.
But I also want people to understand that comes with time, that comes with growing up, that comes with maturity. It's a part of my journey. I've always been raised in the church. I was brought up in the church. But of course I had that time. I'm going to do what I want to do because I know everything.
Everything is rainbows, unicorns, and butterflies in your mind. What resources or types of support were most beneficial to you during your search and reunion process? I know you mentioned one. I can't remember the name.
Yeah, Jay Rosenwald. And the resource was the birthparentfinder.com.
Okay.
That was for the DNA test.
Okay.
The other resource is whatever state you are in. If you are in a state and you're able to get a copy of your original birth certificate, please look into doing that because both things are what helped me find everybody.
And you got your original birth certificate
in the state of Illinois.
In the state of Illinois, later in life, you didn't have that.
I didn't.
You had it. Okay.
Actually, those laws just changed in 2010.
Yeah.
So prior to that, I wasn't even able to do it.
Okay.
I didn't even know how to do it. So a cousin told me, hey, you can get your original birth certificate now. And I was like, oh, let me do that. So that's
Cool.
what prompted all of that. And that was by that time, that was 2011. And I got it back in 2012, like 6 months later.
Oh, okay. What advice would you give to Black families considering adoption and to Black adoptees navigating their journey?
For Black families considering adoption, I would say use all of your resources and learn everything you can about adoption, the good, bad, and the ugly, before you adopt. But I would say if it's right for you, don't shy away from adoption. For Black adoptees being adopted, was your question just Black adoptees in general?
Yeah. Do you have any
Okay.
advice for Black adoptees navigating their own journeys and trying to make sense of it?
Yeah. Also, do research. I think the difference for me versus right now, where we are in technology versus growing up, the resources were not right at my fingertips. The resources are everywhere. Find a community, whether it be on Instagram, TikTok, just find that community and get into that community.
Yes.
And then learn things and meet people. We all have our different stories. We're out here. We are definitely out here.
Mm-hmm.
Find a good podcast, find a good book. It's just all about resources, and they're at your fingertips.
Great advice. Great advice. Thank you, Tarsha, for giving us all of this insight into your own story and these little gold nuggets for us to consider. I want to end with some rapid fire questions, just to keep you on your toes a little bit. Name a person or an organization who has impacted your life as it relates to adoption. I like to give shout outs.
Shout out to Dr. Catherine Garland.
Okay. Who is she?
She is the author of In Search of a Solve, a sex addiction memoir. She is a fellow adoptee, and her book is incredible.
Awesome.
She suffered with sex addiction, but when she tells her story, her adoption story is weaved within that sex addiction story, because that's something else that adoptees deal with, are certain types of addictions. Hers was a sex addiction.
Wow.
And she and I connected back in February of this year. And have you ever just met somebody and that's your person?
Yeah.
That's what has happened with she and I. Like, we've become the best of friends.
Awesome.
But her story is incredible, and she's a brilliant author.
I love it. I'm going to go check that out.
For sure.
If you could afford to drive any car, what would it be?
You know, I'm not a big car person. I would upgrade my 2020 Hyundai Sonata because I love her.
All right.
Upgrade her. Give me the house. I don't care about the car.
You are another Hyundai person. We're going to get Hyundai to sponsor this podcast because you're like the second guest I've had on.
Listen, I love this.
And I have a Hyundai too. I have.
The second one.
What's one thing you're excited about that's coming up this year?
Ooh, this year has been so packed. That's why I had to take a break in July. I am excited about the Black Adoptee meetup happening on October 11th and 12th. It's the very first one that Dr. Catherine Garland and I decided to host. And it's not a conference. It's not a convention. It's nothing like that. It is literally almost like a family reunion, if you will. We are just coming together, going to meet each other. A lot of us know each other on social media, but not in real life. The events we have planned are all fun activities. And what prompted me to do this is because I've been to a few conferences and they wear you out because you're talking about adoption and it's emotional. And I'm like, you know what? We're going to get together. We're not going to do any of that.
So I say the dates again.
I'm sorry,
Say
October 11th and 12th, 2024. Unfortunately, it is sold out. I guess it's not a bad thing.
No, that's not a bad thing, but hopefully you'll do it again. And
Well, it is the plan to do it yearly. We started with a small group on purpose because we wanted to be more intimate.
that's fantastic.
So I'm looking forward to that, and I'm sure you'll see all the social media.
Oh,
the
good. I
weekend that
can't
we do
wait.
get together.
Finish this phrase. The way to my heart is...
Ooh, the weight of my heart.
The way to my heart.
Oh,
the way to my heart is...
The way to my heart is honesty and love.
Love?
Honesty and love.
Oh, honesty and love.
That's the way to my heart.
Beautiful. Describe adoption in 3 words.
The adoption community is going to come for me, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's my truth. I would say, for me, the adoption was beautiful. I would also say scary. And I would also say beautiful. It can be scary. And for some adoptees, safe, because you don't know what they're coming from. That's my testimony.
Thank you. Remember, success is a continuous journey. If you find yourself veering off course, just steer back onto the roadmap until you reach your destination. And whatever you do, never lose hope. Hope is that light inside you that will lead you to your dreams. Tarsha, thank you so much for being here with us and sharing your wisdom, your insight, your stories, and your heart. We appreciate it.
So much. You've been amazing. Thank you.
Bye. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. If you did, I have a few favors to ask of you. First, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, I'd love to hear your takeaways. Please write a review and let me know what you liked. And if you have a question or a suggestion on what you'd like to hear, I'd love to hear that too. Please shoot me an email at support@rgadoptionconsulting.com and let me know what you'd like to hear about. And if you have a question, I may just answer it online. Thanks again for listening. Tune in every Wednesday and Friday morning for a brand new episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.